Councillor Brooks Hill, Councillor Cross, all those in favour? Motion's carried. I'm going to call for adoption of the minutes from the regular council meeting of November 27th, 2018. I'm a mover for that. Councillor Cross, Councillor Elliott, all those in favour? Any business arising from the minutes of November 27th, 2018? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to announcements from the Mayor. I just want to remind everybody that Friday is our CPR Christmas train will be arriving 5:30 at the CPR parking lot. So I just encourage everyone out. That's a great fundraiser for the Community Connections Food Bank. So I'm going to move on to delegations and presentations. Mr. Evans, I understand you're here to present. Come to the podium, please.
You just want me to introduce myself?
Absolutely, that'd be great.
David Evans, I live at 3669 Catherine Road, and I'm here today to talk about our application for a phase 2 and 3 development permit for Mackenzie Village.
Okay, thank you. You may start.
Okay. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to briefly address Council today. The purpose of my delegation is to A, discuss the City's processing of our DP application for phase 2 and 3 of Mackenzie Village to date, and B, ask Council to put our application on the Council agenda for consideration in accordance with Council's statutory obligation under the Local Government Act. To be clear, we're not here to discuss the merits of the application, but are simply asking Council to direct staff to place the matter on the agenda to consider it. The legal framework. Council has a statutory obligation under section 460(2) of the Local Government Act to consider our application. Section 460(2) provides that the local government must consider every application for a permit that requires a resolution of the council. Further, section 7.1 of the City's Development Approvals Bylaw 2097 also provides that every complete application shall be considered by council. Bylaw 2097 also requires that a report from the manager must accompany each application with a recommendation that the application either be approved, denied or amended. Where the report recommends that the application be denied or amended, the applicant must be informed of that and must be given the opportunity to speak to the recommendation at the meeting where Council will be considering it. The processing our application today. We first submitted our application in September 2017. In response to the requirements of City staff, a revised application was submitted on January 5th, 2018. This included a revised concept drawings, servicing drawings and traffic impact assessment. Since then, we have worked diligently and at great expense to try to further revise our application to meet the requirements of City staff. City staff have also now taken the position... skipped ahead. Each time staff ask for additional information or express concerns with our application, we have submitted information and revisions to try to address those concerns. For example, we had to revise our application and site layout to accommodate a corner cut-off for a roundabout that City staff are now saying is required. Staff have then characterised us as doing bait and switch, presenting the City with unanticipated changes, being difficult, and as a result being responsible for the delay in the process of our own application. These characterisations are unfair, unwarranted and misrepresent the facts. Although we are applying for a form and character DP, it took over 9 months for planning staff to provide any comments on the form and character of the proposed development phases. When we inquired as to the process, staff told us that once our application was complete, it would be put to the APC, following which it would be put before Council for consideration at Council's next meeting. Our final application and subdivision layout was submitted to the City on June 4th, 2018, and included the staff required corner cut-off for the roundabout. Our application was then put before the APC on September the 12th, 2018. The APC supported our application subject to minor amendments. When we submitted changes to reflect the minor amendments requested by the APC, e.g. the change in colour of one of the buildings and a revised parking layout, the CAO characterised these amendments as unanticipated and stated that the amendments now triggered a requirement for the city to readdress issues such as building placement, engineering considerations, fire access, garbage access, pedestrian movements, and refused to put our application on the council agenda. The changes made to our application were minor and were not unanticipated, as they were made in response to discussions at the APC meeting. There has been no change to building placement, site layout, engineering considerations, fire access, garbage access, nor pedestrian movements. Thus, for the CAO to indicate that a fulsome re-review of our application is required prior to the application being put before council is completely unwarranted and is contrary to the process that has been laid out by staff. City staff have also now taken the position that our application cannot be advanced unless our property is rezoned, notwithstanding that the application is compliant with the use and density contemplated for CD17, and notwithstanding that our proposed layout is substantially compliant with the Master Development Agreement. We dispute the requirement for rezoning because the application is compliant with the CD17 zoning requirements and is substantially compliant with the Master Development Agreement. As such, any zoning considerations are outside the permitted discretion of council on a DP application. By continuing to delay our application and refusing to place our application before council unless our property is rezoned, a process that is at the complete discretion of council, city staff are effectively eliminating our right to have our application be considered by council, contrary to the Local Government Act and Bylaw of 2097. The law regarding the issuance of DPs is abundantly clear that landowners are entitled to know what the requirements are to obtain the development permit. These requirements must be set out in the city's OCP and cannot be based on the likes or dislikes of staff or individual council members. Thus, if there are outstanding concerns with our application, these must be referenced to the specific guidelines in the OCP so that we know what must be done to make the application acceptable. The law is also clear that an application for a development permit is not an opportunity that entitles a local government to embark on freewheeling negotiation over all the conditions of the development approval. There is no residual discretion in the local government to simply refuse the application where the application complies with the applicable OCP guidelines. There are several cases in BC where the courts have overturned a council's decision to refuse a development permit where the council has considered zoning issues extraneous to the development permit application. In summary, we have expended well over 18 months trying to advance our application. Staff have unreasonably delayed our application and have tried to use the DP process as an opportunity to reconsider the zoning of our property, notwithstanding that the changes to the zoning that staff are seeking are completely extraneous to our DP application. We have lost the ability to market the project this season, and we are fast approaching the cut-off to line up contractors for the next building season, and a further delay will result in another lost building season. We have met the DP guidelines, the APC has supported our application, and yet still city staff are not advancing our application to council for consideration in accordance with its own process. Next steps. In light of the foregoing, we are simply asking that council comply with its statutory obligation to consider our application in a transparent and proper manner, which means a consideration of the form and character requirements in the OCP, nothing more. Our request to council today is that A, our application be placed on the council agenda for consideration as required by section 460(2) of the Local Government Act by the first council meeting in February 2019. B, staff be directed to prepare a report to council prior to that date of the hearing in accordance with Bylaw 2097. And C, we be afforded the right to speak to staff's recommendation at the hearing as per section 7.2 of Bylaw 2097. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Evans. We'll take this under advisement, and I'll talk with staff as to how we move the process forward. I think I could refute some of your statements, but part of a delegation is to listen to what you have to say and not make comment. So I'll reintroduce my thoughts with staff as to how we move this forward, and appreciate you coming today.
Well, since we are on the agenda today, I would appreciate that if any council members wish to make a motion to put those requests forward.
That's my job, not yours, Mr. Evans. I appreciate where you're going. I will ask my council if they have one question of you today. Okay. Any questions, council?
Sorry, repeat.
Do you have a council?
One question?
Do you have one question you'd like to ask Mr. Evans?
Yeah, I do. Can I ask it?
Councilor Juncker.
How many times have you met with city staff this year? Like I would indicate, sorry, Mr. Sturgeon, Mr. Chabot, and our former planner that's no longer with us.
Myself and my architect have only met with city staff once this year. That was in August. That was August the 10th of this year. And in that meeting, which followed our final DP being placed on June 4th, we were expecting to hear further comments and to move it forward, and we were unfortunately told that there was nothing to say, even though that was the only time we met, and that there was nothing to say because Mr. Sturgeon said he expected to have the results of the CTS, which is a third-party traffic review of our TIA, by that point in time, but further investigation discovered that the city didn't even commission that report until August the 30th. So I am at a loss how he thought he would have that report in his hand.
Australia.
Part of accepting a development permit is it's only acceptable once all the studies and background information is prepared. I think there's been some revisions, some new items that have been added to the studies. What's your turnaround time? Can you obtain that information before?
We received, shortly after me submitting my agenda, we received some further requests from engineering, and we were put on notice that we will receive further requests from planning and the subdivision officer. We have not received those further requests yet. That was 2 weeks ago. And we have followed up with the engineering request. We need some confirmation from Mr. Thomas so that we can commission the reports that he can do. As I relayed to him, we can get that report done within 2 weeks, and subject to what the other requests are, we can probably get them done in a timely fashion as well. So I don't think that setting a date of February is really a problem for anybody to be able to get a report done.
Councillor Juncker.
Sorry, I just want to clarify. You said that I believe it was Mr. Thomas emailed you indicating further correspondence or something you were saying?
Yeah, Mr. Thomas emailed me on November 30th, shortly after I put in this request, or put in this agenda, and that was his follow-up to our last traffic impact assessment, which was submitted on June the 15th. So some 6 months later is when he requested further information on that. And many of the requests in his email were new and had never been requested before, despite the fact that the TIA, which was submitted in June, was actually the 5th revision of that TIA. So we're a little bit at a loss as to why the city is now asking for new things.
But the correspondence you said that Mr. Thomas emailed you about hasn't been made clear. You don't know what he's referring to? We know what he's referring to in terms of engineering, but he has asked for 2 new studies to be done. One is a sensitivity study, and the other one is he wishes us to consider the trip generation using different data. And so my engineers have actually emailed him on Friday to clarify what numbers he will take for sensitivity background, and whether he will agree to their proposal for the trip generation, because these are key elements to the report. Otherwise, we will spend a considerable amount of time and effort doing the report again, and it will be rejected. So we'd like to get it clarified before we do the report again.
So, Mr. Evans, I am going to encourage you to sit down with our new Director of Planning, Ms. Wade, and have a conversation That conversation will entail some of the details that need to be coming forward to make your application complete before it can come to council. At that point in time, when you have that conversation with her, she will be very willing to sit down, her and Mr. Sturgeon, and I believe Mr. Thomas will be willing to sit down with you and say, here's the details, this is how we can move this forward. This council and council in the past are quite supportive of moving your project forward, but we have some legal issues, and those legal issues, we cannot deal with anything unless it's complete. In your words, you think we keep changing the game plan. I don't believe that's factual, but I'm going to leave it at that because I'm not going to debate you on that. So I have one councillor that would like to ask a question. Councillor Ryan.
I have a couple questions. One of them is just a procedural question, Your Worship. It's about, and it's just, I don't understand the process, but if it wasn't a complete application, then why was it put in front of the APC?
Mr. Sturgeon, would you like to?
Is that normal? I'm just curious.
We don't require that an application to be complete to be put in front of APC. It's a part of the referral process.
Okay. So it's just one of the steps.
Yep.
Okay. And then my other question, you say you've been working at a great expense in this process, but so could you give us a ballpark of how much?
Yeah, probably year to date, it's about $500,000 to produce the reports and to do the revising, the revisions that the city have asked for. And just for Mr. Thomas's latest request, it'll be about another $20,000. And we don't know what the other requests from planning or subdivision officer are going to be. So we would urge those to be sent to us as soon as possible so that we can then quantify what needs to be done.
Councillor Juncker.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when was the last time the city provided you with a list of outstanding items, or have they sort of laid out a legal opinion?
On November 30th, 6 months after our application was put in.
Okay, so that's recent-ish, though. So you are working. They have provided that to you.
We are, as I said, I need clarification before we can do the reports which are being requested, which are new in nature, most of them. We need confirmation from Mr. Thomas as to the numbers that he is happy, willing for us to use. Because otherwise we run the report. If the report doesn't show what is necessarily required, then we'll be requested to run it again with different numbers. And it's not as simple as just plugging them in.
Councillor Juncker.
Mr. Chabot, seeing as Mr. Thomas is not here, would it be reasonable to expect that the correspondence Mr. Evans is asking for would be given back to him before the Christmas break when employees go on holidays, or?
Your Worship, I can't speak for Mr. Thomas. He is in the back of the room. I don't know if he wants to speak himself. I do want to make a comment about a line of questioning, and I'm detecting a bit of a pattern here, and it's intended to depict the level of effort and professionalism of the staff in dealing with this matter. And despite the shortage of the number of face-to-face meetings, Mr. Evans neglected to mention any meetings that Mr. Thomas may have had with his architect or his engineers. The level of effort and the expenditure of the city trying to advance this application is very large as well.
Right.
We understand where the community is, and we're not making any attempts to withhold or hold back or change the goalposts on this applicant or this application. This is an important project for this community. We're trying to move it forward in accordance with the applicable zoning, in accordance with the master development agreement. And our concerns and the impediments to this and the incomplete nature of the application have been communicated on a number of times. And my intention here is not to enter into a debate about timelines. I didn't bring a list of the time that we've spent. We've been trying to move things forward here in earnest. And so we've assured Mr. Evans of that, and we remain of that view. We intend to work with you cooperatively to advance your application.
If I may have the opportunity to,
Just a minute, Councillor Cross.
Yeah, I would just say at this point, Mr. Evans, that I think the project you have here is a big one for the community. It's very important that it go forward. I would just echo what Mayor Sulz has said, is that at this point the best thing is sit down in due course with our new Director of Development and Planning. I think you'll find there's a couple of clear paths forward, and hopefully we can move this forward for everybody's satisfaction in the right way for the community. That's very important.
Can I ask another question?
Question.
Is it appropriate to comment on the commercial or no?
Not at this point.
Okay.
you, Mr. Evans. You have one more comment to make before you leave?
Yeah, just regarding Mr. Chabot's comment. Yeah, I have met with Mr. Chabot, Mr. Thomas, and Mr. Whitehead once, and I was specifically this year, and I was specifically told not to bring my design team. At the end of that meeting, I was given a roadmap forward to getting DP, and I was told that that would be the end of March. Subsequently met with Mr. Chabot and Mr. Sturgeon on September the 14th following the APC meeting, and again I was given a roadmap forward for the previous council to get to DP by Mr. Chabot, and similarly I think we were also given one in a letter by Mr. Chabot on April 15th where he asked us to submit our completed application, and then there would be a report written and it would be brought to council. That was April 15th. So unfortunately there is a pattern where we are told in the meeting that within the next 6 weeks you're going to go to council, and so you leave the meeting thinking yes, and then that's subsequently followed up with a letter saying, and new council members, so if they want to share the letters we can, they're saying that that staff will not meet us again and they will not talk about our application. So it's just obfuscation that pushes things back 3 months after 3 months after 3 months. And that's my purpose here today, to ask that there's a deadline put on this, because again, waiting for Miss Wade, and I'm hoping that she is going to make some changes and positivity to the city of Revelstoke, but she's not starting again until, from what I understand, till the new year. So there's another month we've wasted. That's 4 months since the APC. So I would, if the first week in February, first meeting in February is too soon, then, if we're going to meet with Miss Wade on January the 2nd, January the 3rd, then let's make a deadline of the last meeting in February or the first meeting in March. Let's get a deadline.
Thank you for your time. I'm not going to put a deadline on it for a reason. I'm asking you to sit down with Ms. Wade and come up with a plan moving forward. This council has been dedicated to moving projects forward. We've been meeting on regular occasions to deal with things. I'm quite satisfied that this council is prepared to listen to what our staff says moving your project forward. We want to move your project forward, but I'm not going to handcuff us by setting a date moving forward. So I will thank you for your time today, Mr. Evans. Encourage you to meet with Ms. Wade, Mr. Sturgeon, the planning staff, and I'm sure that you'll come up with a proper way to move this forward.
I'm ready to meet at any time. There is absolutely no benefit to me not to meet or not to provide the reports or move along with staff's requests. It's the changing goalposts which are a problem.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes.
I would just ask Mr. Evans, and I know staff will, to not give up, and please continue to work with city staff, and hopefully you guys can come to some sort of agreement here, because it's my belief that this project is the right project for Revelstoke. We need housing, more tax dollars, collect more DCCs. So I would ask that you please continue to work, and I have a lot of hope with our new planning director coming in that we can.
We look forward to working with the new planning director, but I honestly have to say I think you've got about 3 months more of our time, and then we'll be withdrawing the project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Moving forward, 9A, fees and charges bylaw. There's a motion there. Is there anyone who cares to read that? Councilor Sherlett.
Fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2243 be adopted.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councilor Brooks Hills. Any discussion on that motion?
Yeah.
Councilor Yonker.
Oh, no, I was saying.
Okay.
Councilor Cross.
I understand that the Revelstoke Grizzlies have brought up their portion, and rather than delay this bylaw with many fees in it getting going, I was wondering if we might be within our power as a council to suggest or give them a nice credit of, my suggestion would be $2,000 for this year.
This fees and charges bylaw doesn't start for them for 2019, 2020. I spent an hour and a half with Mr. Perrant this morning and two of his booster club. I'm indicated to him that I am supportive of the staff's fees and charges bylaw. They're quite concerned that this is a $51 a game increase to them, which looks at, if you look at the minor amount paid, a 23% increase. But it is only $51 per game. The cost of doing business is that. Unfortunately, with our way of providing supplies and whatnot for the arena, so with the change in Fernie, we now have 2 staff members who are certified to run the plant, and we have to pay them their union wage. It's not paying someone to sweep the floor. In addition to that, when they have a full game, we're going through more paper products that we supply than we've ever supplied before. So toilet paper, that sort of thing. Cost of propane has gone up to run the Zamboni, the cost of heat, lights, that sort of thing. So those are all been expenses that we've been subsidizing for this group for a period of time. I did suggest to him that there are ways that we could look at moving forward that might benefit him and benefit the community, and we'll talk about those as we go forward, but I need to apprise my conversation with Mr. Nato, the Parks and Rec supervisor. So in light of that, I thought it was a positive meeting, and they felt it was a positive meeting. I'm not sure if Mr. Perrant's in the crowd, but definitely he felt quite a bit comfortable when he left. His concerns were addressed.
I'm glad to hear that.
We were listening to him, and I think if we come up with a plan moving forward, that will give him some security, and I'm willing to work with him with that. And I think Mr. Nato's willing to work with him with that. It's just a matter of communication, interpretation, and how they perceive things.
Oh, that's welcome news.
So I think that's good. So I'm going to encourage everyone at this table to move the fees and charges bylaw forward. I think it's a needed thing. Councillor Yonker.
Sir, you mentioned because you met with Ryan or Mr. Parrott this morning.
Correct.
So you mentioned that the fees, they're going to apply to the 2019 season.
Correct.
They're not going to apply to the remainder of their season that's coming up.
That's correct, Mr. Nato. It starts in 2019.
Yes, Your Worship. I indicated that the rate increase would be for the 2019-2020 season.
Right. And I just want to clarify then this plan that you're talking about coming up with, then that's hopefully going to be worked with between staff or Mr. Nato and Mr. Parrott then prior to that season then?
Yeah. We'll work on something, and because of the nature of the process, I will sit at that table just to make sure everybody's comfortable moving forward and make sure that everybody's getting their needs met in a way that works for our community.
So if it's possibly going to be changing their fees, would that be coming back to council?
It won't be changing their fees at all. The fees that we set in the fees and charges bylaw will stay.
Okay.
There'll be other amenities that we will discuss going forward. Okay. And those amenities will be discussed with Mr. Nato. Okay. And I've indicated to Mr. Perrant that I will discuss that. We will make sure that there's some way of working with them going forward in a capacity that meets the needs of the community and meets his needs, but I was not promising anything. Okay. And he was fully cognizant of that fact. Any other comments?
I'd like to touch on the 3% for Big Eddy Water Services.
Okay, so when we get to the next one,
it's in the fee.
It's in the fees and charges. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just curious. There's still work to be done in the Big Eddy. There's the reservoir, and I think we received a letter from Peter Humphreys regarding the land acquisition.
Yeah, so as staff will look at all those things going forward. We were going to anyway. Whether we dispose of that land or use it for other things for the community as a whole will be decided upon at the staff table. They'll make some decisions, and if it needs to come to council for some reason, then it will come to council. But they are definitely hearing what Mr. Humphreys has to say and are cognizant of his concerns.
So 3%, there's a partial tax that I guess everyone in the Big Eddy agreed to,
correct.
Elected on this, or voted on this thing. So the 3% increase, is that on top of the parcel or applied to the parcel tax? Or?
Yes.
Yeah, Your Worship, the parcel tax pays the capital cost of the infrastructure upgrades.
Right.
the utility rate pays the operating costs.
So the city, the rest of the city is going through a 10% increase on the water and sewer.
Correct.
They're just going for 3.
That's correct. Any other further discussion on the motion? Okay, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion's carried. Going to go on to the Part B. Somebody make that motion for me, please. Councillor Elliott.
Motion that the Big Eddy Water Local Area Service Parcel Tax bylaw number 2241 be adopted.
We have a seconder for that motion. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Yonker.
Yes, Your Worship, I just want to clarify then. So when the city, and I know maybe Mr. Chapeau would be better to answer, but when the city took over the Big Eddy water system then, so the city, that's now their asset, that Mr. Humphreys was referring to in his letter then?
Correct.
But there was no, sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something.
No, I'm unclear on your question. What's now their asset?
The building that Mr. Humphreys referred to.
The water system, all of its debts, liabilities, I guess assets became the property of the city and the responsibility to operate on behalf of the users.
Right.
And so the city operates, there are 2 distinct water systems. The general city water system that serves everything but the Big Eddy, and then the Big Eddy. And they're self-funding utilities. So they raise their own operating and capital costs distinct from general property tax. And so there's some assets that may be surplus to the need. If the city were to dispose of those and earn any income from them, the credit of those amounts would go against either the operating fund or the capital debt for the Big Eddy Water Service, because it belongs to them.
Awesome, thank you.
Councillor Ali.
To complete that water system for the Big Eddy, do you have an estimate of what the next...
Mr. Thomas just came forward. Maybe he can give council a brief overview of what's outstanding and how much more we can complete with the available funds.
Your Worship, we're still working on some of the items from this year's projects, which are upgrading the wells. So we drilled a 3rd well over there, and we're just installing some works at the well site. You may have seen we've done some work on the hill as you head out of town on Highway 23 South. That is, we're clearing a right-of-way for a water main to go up to the reservoir. So we've the work that we want to get done next year is water main up to the reservoir and a new reservoir, so a 2nd reservoir up there. So I'll be bringing a report to council before we go out for procurement for next year. So there'll be a request for proposals for the construction contract, but the extent of that construction contract will be limited by the amount of money that we've got. Like we're not intending to spend more money than we raised either through the grant or through this particular parcel tax.
Any further discussion? So I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 9C. Someone move that forward for me, please.
Aye.
Councillor Cross.
That the Thomas Brook Water and Sewer Local Area Service Parcel Tax Bylaw number 2242 be adopted.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Rind. Any discussion on the motion? This is for parcel tax that the Thomas Brook water area have agreed to so that we can pay for the water. Councillor Cross.
Your Worship, since it has the name Thomas Brook in it, and there's always some worry out there about the Thomas Brook and what's been going on, perhaps you could update us on what is going on with Thomas Brook in terms of other issues with water purity and those types of
Thomas
issues.
Brook or Turtle Creek?
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
So there is an issue with some effluent of some sort in Turtle Creek, and Mr. Thomas could probably speak to that a little better than I. Are you prepared to answer a question regarding that, Mr. Thomas?
Your Worship, I've spoken with the Ministry of Environment, and I believe RMR is working with the Ministry of Environment at the moment to determine the source of the material that's getting into the creek. I'm not sure where that's up to. I haven't had a chance to catch up with RMR or the Ministry of Environment about that, but I I understand they're working quite diligently at trying to find that and rectify the problem. When I spoke with a member of RMR's team yesterday, I asked that they would, work hard to get this resolved before Christmas, so that we weren't having this stormwater going into the sanitary sewer system, nor the effluent going into the stream. So trying to avoid two things there.
Councillor Juncker.
I just had a question, Your Worship, just for clarification. I may be wrong, but I know it was either Mr. Thomas or Mr. Chabot that when we spoke in the last meeting. So now that the residents of this area that are connected to the city sewer and water, is it still legal then, just because I've had this question come up a few times, to maintain a well on their property, Mr. Thomas, or do those have to be filled, or Mr. Chabot?
Mr. Chabot.
I would think we would have concern about cross-connection control. A person could probably have a private well on a property, provided there's no interconnection to the city's water distribution network, and you could use it for watering your plantings in your garden and such as you saw fit. We would prefer to know of those things and make sure that there was no possibility of cross-connection.
Right. Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Thomas.
So back to the issue regarding the local service aerial parcel tax. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Elliott?
This is the first year the group out there will be charged for this parcel tax, is that right?
That's correct.
The Big Eddy parcel tax is second year in?
No, it'll be first year next year too.
So we marked an increase, 3% for operating. So the,
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Going to go on to item 11A, Development Services. One of you make that. Councillor Brooks Hill.
That the highway use license for 208 Mackenzie Avenue between the city of Revelstoke and Vanessa Miriam Smith for the installation of a replacement canopy/awning sign encroaching over the sidewalk be approved.
I have a seconder for that motion. Councillor Charlotte. Any discussion on the motion? This is a canopy that's over top of Grizzly Bookstore. Anything that is hung over city right-of-way needs to have a highway use agreement. So whether that be a light or a canopy or an awning such as this. So she's replacing the awning or replacing the skin on the awning, and there was never any highway use agreement in previous years, is my understanding. So that's why we're asking this, because there is now a generation of either a building permit or some sort of permitting issue dealing with this thing. This is how we go ahead and ask so that we have legal coverage for our city. Mr. Sturgeon.
The property owner is also replacing the structure supporting the awning.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on this motion? Councillor Elliott.
I was curious, is there a faster way to process this? I just don't know whether bringing it to council, this issue is a major concern, and I don't know.
So it does appear, Your Worship,
yes.
It does appear to be a housekeeping issue, but in reality, in accordance to legislation, council has to do a resolution to let something be on city property or over top of city property, and it is protection from liability, risk mitigation. So it's legislated. We tried to get around it.
Any further discussion on this motion, Councillor Elliott?
Could we create the electric? Could we empower our development department to oversee it?
It's provincial. It's provincial legislation.
Yeah, legislated in the community charter, the local government can grant these temporary licenses to use non-exclusive use, because if it were to be an exclusive, or if it were for a physical building encroachment onto the street, then it would have to be a more permanent form of license and would require even more rigorous procedure. This is pretty short. I think what's important to keep in mind, and I think the report notes it, is that the city retains the right to order the removal of these encroachments at any time should operational need or highway widening projects imply, or other utility installation, without compensation to the owner as well. And it is the liability insurance that indemnifies the taxpayers against somebody's awning falling on somebody's head while they're on our street.
do the same regulations regarding signage apply? Do they come to council as well?
If a sign's hanging over the street,
You can
yes.
see it not overhanging the highway or street.
There's a separate, that's a separate sign by.
Yeah, they don't come to council. Yeah, okay.
Any further discussion on this, Councillor Cross?
Just a comment, Your Worship, that anybody doing new canopies, pay attention to the snow bombing aspect, because we're all getting bombed as we walk downtown. So somehow that's got to get thought about and solved.
Any further discussion on 11A? All those in favor? Motion's carried. 11, or part 2 of 11A. Somebody make that motion, please. Councillor Sherlock.
The highway use license for 107 First Street East between the City of Revelstoke and Martin McKee for the installation of building encroachments be approved.
I have a second for that motion. Councillor Ryan. Any discussion on that motion? Similar situation to the one that we just discussed. Is that correct? Anything further? All those in favor? Motion's carried. We're now going on to 11B, Development Services. We have a presentation. Discussion around the table.
What you have in front of you today is a referral from the province of BC for a proposed cannabis retail sales license. I put a sort of a rough timeline on the screen for you here so we can all understand how we got to where we're at. As you'll recall, the previous council adopted a number of amending bylaws to establish permissive regulations in Revelstoke for the sale of recreational cannabis. And then the day after federal legislation took effect, shortly after we updated our internal policy, which is now why this referral is being presented to you. That policy states that all referrals we receive from the province will be presented to council, and council can consider that. November 6th, we did receive one from the province for 109 Connaught Avenue. We sent out notifications to all property owners and tenants within 100 meters of that property, and today council is considering it. So this is the flow chart that we make available to the public and to anyone else who's interested in just pointing out there where we're at. So following this, if council decides to not support this, the process will terminate and we'll let the province know. If council decides to endorse the recommendation that we've put in front of you today, then we will send that information to the province, and the applicant will be required to go through a few more steps. Those are not clear to me. That happens in Victoria. And then once that's finished and they present us with their provincial license, then staff will issue them a business license and there's a building permit requirements to fulfill, and then sign permit and we'll be off. So the location here, 109 Connaught, just on the far side of First Street. I've highlighted it there in the center of the map. Our zoning is C1, so C1 now allows retail cannabis sales. Just an aerial there so you can see we've got a mixture of building types surrounding this. I noted that in the report. It's mostly commercial with some apartment buildings on top of the commercial, and immediately to the northeast we have a single family home, I should say. And beyond that is the RCU insurance building. There's a street view of it, and you can see we've got some restaurant here, there's a travel agency in there, there's apartments up the top here, and this is the proposed location on the main floor and the house next door.
It's a great house, by the way.
This is the This is the buffering that we identified the closest facilities that cater to youth. If you recall, there's some provisions in the zoning bylaw that limit the distance from parks, schools, daycares, and any other facilities that are municipally owned that cater to youth and children. These are not the only ones, these are the closest. So the closest school is, of course, the elementary and the high school down here. This is the community center where there is a daycare, and this is the closest park. There's another park down here. Oh, too much coffee. But that one's slightly farther away. Our considerations on this are that all zoning requirements have been met. We've taken a look at the initial business licensing requirements and building permit. They have their application for their building permit in already, and that's going through smoothly. We did receive 3 written comments and 2 requests for clarification. The written comments were negative in nature. I've summarized those in the report, so I'm not going to repeat them here. Our consideration of this matter is that it is an appropriate location and it meets the intent of the regulatory criteria that we established through the process a couple months ago, and thus our recommendation is there on the screen. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Councillors, any questions for Mr. Sturgeon? Councillor Yonker.
Just clarification on this and retail shops. When we're allowing for the potential of new retail shops, is parking factored in, or?
There's provisions in the bylaw surrounding parking that say if you're not changing the area of the existing building, then no further parking requirements are made. Okay. If they're adding additional area on that's commercial or residential, then we would then new parking requirements. So say they added an additional story, or they expanded on the back, then it would be on a per square meter basis that parking is required.
And just one other, I had really good report by the way, but I had read in here there was talk about obviously I can't find it exactly the second, but like with the RCMP, like armed robbery, all that plans and stuff. What point does that get factored in? Is that after if council is to approve it, or?
The policing issue was one that was raised during the policy process we did a couple of months ago. Okay. So their concerns there don't change the nature of our regulations. Okay. The provincial requirements for the building code are quite significant. All product has to be put within basically a vault, similar to a bank vault in the evening. There's particular requirements for particular door locks and access to and from the building. So we felt that those issues would be resolved by meeting the provincial criteria for that. And if there's any further criteria on next applications, then we can deal with that.
So Your Worship, I would just like to say, as I know you'd like to clarify, but it's a great report, and I did see and read the concerns from Rebel Smoke, Glass, and Vape, but I'd like to indicate that my personal belief is that it should be first come, first served, like the city staff indicated, and I support this, and I will be voting in favor of this.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, previous council made that statement that as we received these, we would deal with them first come, first serve. And despite how things might be within the provincial government and how they deal with things, this is the first item that's come to us in regards to cannabis. Any other, Councillor?
I have a question for Mr. Sturgeon through the chair. Given our restrictions on location 100 meters from another location and other restrictions for distances from parks, would there be another location downtown that's commercially zoned would be available?
Possible. I didn't highlight the 100-meter buffer around the location, but you can get a sense of the distance. That's 100 meters right there, and if I can hold this still enough for an instant.
But like further east on
We've got some areas down here that are possibilities. I'm not going to divulge the other locations. We have had inquiries. Okay. Keep that confidential until the referral from the province has been received, but it is feasible.
Okay. Mr. Chabot.
Your Worship, I was visited at City Hall today by a person, and it was my mistake. I see that in the notice given, they say that they would receive written submissions until 3 p.m. I indicated to this person that they could come to the meeting today and make their views known respecting this application to the council prior to council considering a motion. This is our first one. I know with variance permits we hadn't done it that way. I was always used to there being an informal hearing and people would avail themselves the opportunity to come to the meeting. So if council would indulge that.
Absolutely, we'll do that. I'm just going to ask if there's any other councillors that have any further questions, and then I'll ask the public if they'd like to make comment. Councillor Charlotte.
I'm curious about, just on procedure and process, is our option today to approve or not approve? Is there an option to do a, how did they word it here, to postpone the review? Is that an option or not?
What would be the reason?
I'm just reading the letter from the Glass and Vape Shop. I'm of the understanding that that would not be an option for us, that we cannot do any preference for local business versus other business, that's not.
That's correct. We had put in our policy previously, previous council, that we would deal with this on first come, first serve. Yeah. And so that's before us today. That sets precedent how we go forward. So I would indicate to you that we should carry on that first serve, or first come, first serve. Okay. Councillor Ryan.
Do we have the ability to add some kind of like in our recommendation, if we submit a positive recommendation to the LCRB, do we have the ability to recommend changing the hours of operation? I know they suggested that it would be open on Fridays and Saturdays until 11 p.m. And I was just thinking maybe that would draw a more disruptive crowd or something than the people coming during the day. Anyways, I just was curious if that's within our...
They might be more apt to eat more pizza at that time of night. Versus anything. Mr. Sturgeon.
Through the chair, we could put restrictions on. We did go through hours when we went through the original process. And we decided to align them with liquor store hours.
Gotcha.
If you wished to put that in your recommendation, then the province would take consideration of that and put that in their license.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Cross.
I'd like to ask, through you, Your Worship, Mr. Sturgeon, could you bring back the photo of the property, the front view? Oh, there you are. Okay, so I'm not sure what we can do about it, or if anything, but I am concerned about that residence next door being in a downtown core. It's an unexpected situation, of course, right? Because it is a downtown core commercial. You don't expect to have a house right there. Maybe you expect to have housing on top of a building, but not right next door. And I'm just wondering if, what do we have as latitude or options? Has the applicant suggested they might build a better fence, or, just kind of throwing stuff out there to help the resident feel like their property value is protected and they have peaceful residence?
The proponent coming forward is not the landowner of that piece of property, so I'm not sure what latitudes we would have to force that issue. But it does come down to the good neighbor policy, and we all will have concerns as to how this is going to play out going forward. But no matter where it was in the downtown core, we would have concerns about how things were going to move forward, as we do with anything related to liquor. Mr. Sturgeon.
The process here is that we're making a recommendation back to the province whether or not that they would support this. So this is commenting back on their regulatory ability. We don't necessarily have the ability to impose anything at this time. We do have our clean air bylaw. We do have the hours of operation. We do have bylaw enforcement and police complaints. And there are. I have not heard directly from this particular neighbor, but I'm not sure if this delegation is that person, so I don't know what their specific concerns are. As far as the range of possible retail uses and what you could be selling out of the store, there's any number of them, and depending on what the concerns are, then we'd address those one by one.
And I understand that when the budget process occurs, we're hoping to have more bylaw enforcement in that budget, exactly for this kind of thing, clean air bylaw and good behavior and so on and so forth.
Right.
Just a minute. Councillor Yonker, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just not really a question, Your Worship, but I was just going to make a statement that I actually rented that house right there for a couple of years prior to buying one, and I may be wrong, but I'm not sure who the delegation is, but the house that I lived in there, actually when just Councillor Cross was talking about the fence, the property basically right up to the building is actually owned by the Baruskis, which is who I was renting from, separate from the actual apartment building with the store in there. So, but again, I think that's something that, if came be through the clean air bylaw, and something we could get Ms. Lowe and further down the road. But I would just hope, like you indicated, Your Worship, good neighbors, good neighbors.
And I think the issue on the table here is the support for this going forward. Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more time if there's any other comments from council, and then I'm going to ask the public to weigh in if they care to. Councillor Elliott.
So this is probably maybe the last retail space available in our downtown core, or maybe one or two smaller parcels around. Revelstoke, Revel Smoke, which is 2 blocks down, he's in jeopardy of losing whatever he's invested in. If this goes as a cannabis distributor, we're okay with that. I mean, that's
not our issue.
No, I know. I was saying, would it be a possibility in the future to offer a variance on the proximity of a second outlet?
There's always that possibility. However, my suggestion is there was reasons that we in previous council had put in these parameters for spacing, so that we didn't have everybody in the same area with a toot shop, so that they could be combined. So that's really. I'm sorry for that comment, but
well, I would just suggest that if they're interested, you bring that up as a variance, as a way to. He's throwing away his money. I mean,
and part of that's going to be, so when we look at these sorts of things, as a landowner downtown or as a commercial landowner downtown, part of these things are people come forward that want to rent these places that have this availability. As a landowner, the landowner may not be enticed to allow that in their building. So, that's otherwise I'd have them all in mind.
Sorry, I keep asking questions. One more, just based off of what Councillor Elliott said. So, if this was to be approved, Mr. Surgeon, by council, is there an option that if another business, whoever was, came forward, even though they were within the 100 meters, that council did have the option to make a variance or an amendment to allow that business within the 100 meters? Is that a possibility?
Through Your Worship, it would require an amendment to the zoning bylaw. Okay. So that would come with a public hearing, okay, and then the required public consultation process. And as the mayor stated, we established these buffers because that was based on the feedback from the public that we did through a survey. So all those things would start to be taken into consideration.
Perfect, thank you.
Hey, councillors, I'm now going to go to the public. If there's anyone in the gallery that would like to speak to this or make comment, please come forward to the podium, state your name and address, and give us your input, please.
My name is Curtis Kohler. I live at 156 Greeley Crescent. I'm one of the owners of Revel Smoke Glass and Vape Shop. I'm all for the Star Buds, and I believe that there should be a dispensary too downtown. I may not necessarily be all down for the franchise, but it is what it is. I believe there should be one or two in the downtown area. We started this business. We opened it up on November 1st, and we started to build like a connection with the community already, with the hopes of potentially going on to this business. It's just my girlfriend and I who are doing it, and we've been doing it out of pocket and putting it like everything into it. This basically would put a hold or like a stop on us if it was to continue or whatever. We're not necessarily asking to stop them and say no to them, but we're asking that what you questioned, that if they'd be willing to have a location within the 100 meters if they do get approved. So we just basically, we're a couple steps behind them. Our application is in. We spent the $7,500. The gamble, so if we don't get it, we lose it, whether or not, and they get approved, or like whether we're going to get approved or not. And that's our next goal, is to go to that step and help the guard be the city.
Great, thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Do you have a question, Councillor Elliott?
No, yeah, I just would recognize that there's a lot at stake, giving one person and excluding the other, and given the fact that there isn't a lot of other options for retail space in our community, I would say that should weigh into our decision going forward.
Yeah, please.
Councillor Ryan?
I would just add too that I like their location, the fact that it's sort of a little bit hidden and it sort of lends itself well, and it may not seem as though there's two in one spot. But anyways, we can cover that when we get there. But
perfect, thanks. Would you like to come forward and make a statement? State your name and address, please.
My name is Chad Hollett. I'm partners with Starbuds, and current we just made an offer on a place in town. As you guys can understand, it's very difficult to find a place to live, so we wanted to make sure we found the right place with room for our staff as well. Just a couple things I wanted to let you guys know. We are a Canadian company. Our head office is in Kelowna. The people who have work in the store will be local. We will be here supporting the community as best as possible. One of the big things with this whole process has been security, safety of the youth and the public. So during this process, we have gone above and beyond. We've partnered with Cannabis Compliance Inc., David Hyde Securities to make sure everything was above board. We carry the best security policies in the game, and compliance is #1 in the province. So you wouldn't even be seeing our application today unless we had done everything the province had asked at this point. So all we're asking for today is a chance to be the #1 recreational store in Revelstoke and be one of the first 10 approved in the province.
Great. Thank you for your input. Anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak? Would like to come forward, please? State your name and address.
Hi, my name's Stacey Axford. I live at 105 Connor Avenue, the house that's right next door. More or less, it is a safety thing for us that I'm concerned about. We already have enough issues with people trying to park in our driveway as it is. We have people wandering through our yard quite a bit as it is. The other thing I also question is that I've noticed all the liquor stores in town don't have residents above it. I feel like it should be, I don't know if that's a bylaw thing or like I just feel like maybe it's something that needs to be looked at. The liquor stores and the pharmacies in town both are not directly attached to a residential building, and I just think that maybe that should also be something that's considered in the process as well. So, yeah, that's my concerns.
Thank you. So, Mr. Sturgeon, just regarding the resident upstairs, it's has a separate entrance and whatnot.
It's a separate entrance around the side, and it's a separate use that's permitted on the property. So the C1 zone is our widest ranging zone. So right. You can a huge list of things you can do within them. Combining particular uses is then regulated through the BC Building Code. Correct. So if you're have a mechanic shop downstairs, you're dealing with hazardous chemicals or something like that, you can't necessarily have a residence on top. But in this case, there's nothing preventing that, and we did look into that as part of the process.
Councillor Young.
Ms. Lowe, just seeing as you're in charge of the bylaw enforcement and among everything else, basically. I have a question just regarding our Clean Air Act, which I believe the bylaw was updated by the past council. When, if this is successful and the new building or retail shop is to open, is it something that we've looked at, or is it a possibility that maybe we can place signs in that area reminding the public of our Clean Air bylaw and what is and isn't appropriate? Would that be something we've thought about or could look at?
The Clean Air bylaw was also amended at the time that we did the framework for the cannabis legislation. So they does take into consideration smoking, and cannabis is included.
Right.
So I don't know about signage, but increased bylaw enforcement in the area is definitely something we could accommodate.
Yeah, just curious, and with sign, just imagining a sign basically reminding, customers, because I do believe that a large portion, most likely, of the customers that will be at that business won't be from within Revelstoke.
There's also provincial legislation with respect to smoking outside of an entrance or an air intake or a window. So they would be prohibited in that whole area.
Right, yeah, and I understand. I'm just wondering if it had been looked at possibly because it's a brand new business in town. This is a whole new thing for the country, Revelstoke as a whole.
It was. When we did the regulatory framework, we definitely looked at involving the Clean Air bylaw.
Okay.
Mr. Chabot.
Your Worship, just some responsibility go to the business owner to ensure that it doesn't generate neighborhood complaints, that the patrons coming and going from this establishment do so with the proper deportment and don't cause problems in the neighborhood. Right. Otherwise, renewal on business license can become problematic.
Absolutely. Appreciate that input. Thank you. Mr. Early.
The alcohol consumption or cannabis consumption outside of that's not a bylaw infraction, that's a police infraction. Is it not?
Cannabis, through your worship, cannabis, smoking.
In public space, public
is not controlled through the RCMP, it's controlled through the Clean Air bylaw.
How about alcohol?
Alcohol is RCMP.
So in the back like to speak?
I just want to reiterate that part of our policy was working with David Hyde Security, who is the #1 security firm in the nation that's worked with 80 of the 123 licensed producers. So a part of our plan, which I wish you guys could have seen, is a 14-page security document that we had done to deal with security for the neighbors and everybody in the town and the youth and everybody else. So I wish you guys could have seen that. I'm not sure if you had, but we went above and beyond and got that report done so we knew exactly what we would need and how we could best help.
Okay. Someone else?
I just have one more thing. If a business was to become, get the application and become successful, and they wanted to expand, would they, so say if one business had if someone else got downtown got a place, and they wanted to move, or so the city built a park, then 100 meters comes into play again, would, sorry, I just gotta read what I recognized for horrible it is.
But the approval is specific to the location, Your Worship. If a business wanted to relocate, would have to go through the city application process again.
And the provincial one as well.
Yeah, I wasn't sure on that.
For a new physical address, because you have to have a physical inspection first as well. So if you wanted to move, you have to start the whole process again.
Okay. So the simplest route would be just to go for an amended bylaw, zoning amendment. Is that right?
Well, we're not even talking about that at this point. That would have to be something that comes to us down the road. The issue here is, do we support this or not? And we haven't even put that motion on the floor yet. We're just hearing the input from the community. So I'll ask one last time, is there anyone else around the council table that would like to make a statement or ask a question, and then I will ask for this motion to be made.
Excuse me, sorry.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, item 11B, there's a motion in front of you. Is there anyone around the table that would like to read that? Councillor Ryan.
That a recommendation of support be sent to the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch for the issuance of a cannabis retail store license for 1175833 BC Limited, Starbuds at 109 Connaught Avenue.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Charlotte. Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. I think we have our first cannabis store coming through. Item 11C, engineering. Someone like to read that motion, please? Councillor Yonker.
That submission of an application to the Provincial Local Government Infrastructure Planning Grant Program for $10,000 towards the development of a liquid waste management plan be approved.
Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Cross. Any discussion on the motion? This is actually the city has applied for a grant to go towards development of a liquid waste management plan. So I just encourage everyone to support this going forward. This is important dollars for us to actually start the plan project going forward. Councillor Yonker.
Just for reading this, Your Worship, so the initial $10,000, but then it, which I agree is an important process, and reading through here, I think the report came from Mr. Thomas, basically saying that this is a necessary step to eventually get our liquid management program. But is this something that's going to be looked at through in the budget? Because I see here through sewer reserves for the $80,000 was budgeted for this project, however staff availability. So will that still, my question is, are those $80,000 funds still planning on being pulled from the sewer reserves in 2019 then for the management plan that's in your report?
Mr. Thomas?
Your Worship, I believe that there's funding already allocated in this year's budget, and we're just carrying it over to 2019. I can't remember the exact value, but certainly this $10,000 will assist with that. I think we'll definitely be talking about this at the budget process, because this is a multi-year process going through a liquid waste management plan, and we're really going to have to work with the province on making sure that they're happy with where we're restarting it from. And yeah, so this is sort of, it's an opportunity to apply for a grant, but we haven't scoped out the whole project yet. So as we get closer to scoping out the project, we'll be bringing that to council for your information as well.
Any further discussion on this motion? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item 11D, budget timeline. Someone like to, Councillor Yonker.
That the proposed 2019-2023 financial plan timeline be approved.
The seconder for that motion, Councillor Ryan. Any discussion on the motion? I think this is pretty straightforward. The timeline that Ms. McCabe has put before us seems to be appropriate. So I'll just encourage you to approve this going forward. Again, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Going on to communications, social development committee meetings minutes for June 27th, 2018. Any comment on those? But the minutes for September 12th, 2018 and October 24th, 2018. Going on further, tech steering committee minutes for July 18th, 2018. Any comments on that? Councillor Sherwood.
I was at this meeting, we were talking about how funding, the announcement of the funding was supposed to be coming through the policing. I'm just curious if we've heard back on the funding of the next stage for the tech steering.
Get any indication? No.
No.
I think staff are meeting with a representative of the province who administers the rural dividend fund on Monday.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Are we in jeopardy of losing that funding, or?
No, the first round of funding was finished, so now we're waiting on the next phase of funding. So it's kind of in this stage.
So grant program.
So there's a position sort of in limbo, or is that what I get? There's a tech.
They've been really supportive of the work that Revelstoke's been doing in developing a tech strategy and trying to incentivize the creative sector and working on towards a fabrication lab and such. Province has been strongly supportive, I believe.
As has Community Futures. Like, there was talk that regardless of what happens, something will continue. That's not in jeopardy at all. So it's just how it moves forward.
Thank you, Councillor. Advisory Planning Commission minutes of November 20th, 2018. Comment on that? Aquatic Center monthly reports for November 2018. It's glad to see that we still seem to be doing well in Aquatic Center. So thank you for that, Ms. Donato. Business license summary, November 2018. Any comments? Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing letter principles of conduct. Any comment on that? Moving on, any questions from the press?
No.
Nothing?
Your Worship, Council and staff, with regards to the delegation today from Mr. Evans, what steps are still outstanding to get his projects to where he wants it to be, to groundbreaking?
My understanding is that the application process is not yet complete. There's some things that he needs to complete for staffing. So for that to move forward, he needs to have communication with the staff. They've indicated to him as to the things that he needs to do. And I have seen a copy of an email that came through last night with a response back. So I know that ongoing communications has been there. But I'll ask Mr. Sturgeon or Ms. Wade if they would like to weigh in any further on that. Mr. Chabot?
Your Worship, I'm not going to provide an itemized list. I think, as Council knows, zoning that is accompanied by a master development agreement intended to, I guess, provide a level of flexibility as development goes forward on multi-phase development, often results in disagreement about compliance with general guidelines. So while there are some hard and fast development permit application requirements as described in the MDA and in the development procedures bylaw still outstanding, there are some other matters where we have disagreement about whether or not there's been substantial compliance with the terms of the master development agreement. And so those need to be the subject of further discussion.
Okay. Anything further, Mr. Orlando?
Your Worship.
Okay. All right, if there's no other questions from the press, I'm going to ask for a motion to go in camera pursuant to sections 90.1A and I of the Community Charter. Do I have a motion for that? Councillor Brooks Hills, Councillor Yonker, all those in favor? I'm going to take a 5-minute break before we go in camera. Thank you.